This happened yesterday, and before anyone says anything, yes, I know I'm foolish. I had just gotten home from work around 9 p.m. and had barely had time to get my shoes off when I got a phone call from some number I didn't recognize. I'm searching for new jobs and thought that it might be one of the places that I was applying to, calling me back. I pick it up, and it's some guy who says that he's with some kind of third-party detention center, which, as he explained it, was for low-risk inmates that were sent there whenever the local jails were busy or filled. That should have set off a nice big red flag for me, but for whatever reason, it just made sense in my tired brain. I'm getting ready to tell this guy I'm not interested in making a donation or anything like that when he asks if this is, and he says my full name. I confirm, and he says that they're holding my boyfriend at this center, stating my boyfriend's full name and giving a dead-on description of him. I ask what's going on since my boyfriend is supposed to be at work right now, and the guy on the other end provides an explanation. He says that my boyfriend had struck a pregnant woman with his car on his way to work, and was 4 times the legal limit for blood alcohol. He said the woman was in critical condition, and that my boyfriend had broken a few ribs and his nose in the accident. I'm freaking out at this point and ask if I can speak to my boyfriend, which the man obliges. I'm put on hold for a minute or two before someone picks up the line. This person on the other end was panicking, saying how it wasn't his fault, and begged me not to tell his parents, again using my name. It didn't particularly sound like my boyfriend, but I figured it was because of the broken nose he supposedly had, and his tone really helped to sell it because it all sounded so legitimate. The man from before comes back on the line before I can ask any questions, and explains that they had to sedate my boyfriend since he had begun to panic and hyperventilate, which I was starting to relate to more and more by the second. The man on the other end tells me that I should come right away and that the bail is set at $2,000 cash only. I stupidly tell him that I don't have that much and that I maybe have half of that. He tells me that it's fine and that I can work something out with the front office once I get there, and to just bring what I have, seeming like he's trying to calm me down. He's giving me the address, and I can barely hold a pen because my hands are shaking so badly, and I'm very poorly trying to hold back tears. All of a sudden, the door opens up, and in walks my boyfriend, completely normal looking, with no broken nose, but more than a little confused as to why I'm crying. I'm still on the phone with the man and ask him what the heck he thinks he's doing, telling him how my boyfriend just walked in, and he promptly hangs up. I tried calling back a few times, but it went directly to voicemail. Later, I found out that the power to the bar my boyfriend works at had gone out, so his boss sent everyone home early, and I had never been so grateful for a power outage. My boyfriend slept on the couch to keep watch, but unfortunately, I still couldn't sleep that night, so I decided to look up the name of the organization the man said he worked for. Big surprise, that turned up nothing. I then looked up the address he had given me on Google Maps and see that it was some random abandoned strip mall in the middle of a sketchy area. What really freaked me out about this whole thing was the guy knew my number, both mine and my boyfriend's names, but didn't sound like anyone we had met before. When I was a kid growing up in a very small town in the 80s and 90s, my parents often left me and my little sister home alone for a few hours at a time to run errands. My mom had 2 brothers, and we lived in the same town as one of her brothers and his family. Being a close-knit family, my cousins and I were always over at each other's houses. The adults would leave us alone a lot. Back then, it was standard to tell kids not to open the doors for anybody, and not to use the stove, and we never thought anything about it. After my parents divorced, it happened more often as both my parents worked different shifts at their jobs. My sister and I lived in town, and my cousins and my grandma lived outside of town with only a few neighbors nearby. So my sister and I got the best of both worlds, city kids and country kids. Because we lived in such a small community, everyone knew everyone else, and I think we all felt perfectly safe that nothing bad would ever happen, and if it did, our neighbors would help us. Around the time I was 8 or 9 years old, I began to get strange phone calls. It would be a man's voice on the phone, and these calls would almost always come when I was home alone. This person would tell me they could see me, that they knew I was alone, and that they were coming to get me. When I'd get these calls, I'd usually just hang up without saying anything. Of course, it terrified me, but I was too scared to tell my parents. I was scared by the calls, but I also liked getting to stay home alone. Being left to take care of my sister made me feel grown, and I didn't want my parents to stop leaving me in charge. Stupidly, I kept the calls to myself. One day, while my dad was at work, my cousin, who was a year older than me, was at my house. We were watching TV and playing when the phone rang. She answered it, and her face went pale. She hung up and started crying. I immediately asked her what was wrong, and she shook her head, saying, "I can't tell you." After some time, she finally told me about how this man would call her a lot when she was home alone, always telling her he knew she was by herself and he was going to come get her. I was shocked. I explained that I had been getting the same calls, and we immediately agreed that it had to be one of her older brothers or their friends playing a mean joke on us. We calmed down and kind of laughed it off. I didn't get another call for a while after that, so I almost forgot about it. In the summer between my 6th and 7th grade year, my grandma had taken a part-time job and my mom lived in another town. So my sister and I were home alone almost all day every day while my dad worked. We spent our days outside playing in the yard, riding bikes around the neighborhood, and tanning in our backyard a lot. One day my sister was gone to a friend's and my cousin was back at my house. We were listening to music and dancing around the living room when the phone rang. I picked it up, and there it was, the voice. At this point, I was 12 years old, and I had developed a little bit of an attitude. When the man told me he knew we were home alone, I laughed and told him that he is a liar. He waited a moment and said, "I can prove that I know you're alone." I laughed again, a little more nervously this time, and said, "Oh, really? Then do it." His response was, "I love that little yellow tank top you're wearing today." By this time, my cousin had turned off the music and was watching me, so she saw when the color drained out of my face. I was freaking out. I had just gotten a new outfit and was wearing it, a yellow tank top and jean shorts with matching yellow and pink patches. I told him to leave us alone and slammed the phone down, my heart racing. I started crying and told my cousin, it was him. He knows we're here by ourselves. I ran over to shut the living room curtains and my cousin said, "I think we should call somebody." I agreed, but instead of calling the police, she picked up the phone and tried to call her mom at work. We got no answer. I called my dad's work and left a message with the gate guard to have him call me. As we were debating what to do next, I heard the gravel in our driveway crunch under the wheels of a vehicle. I ran to the window and peeked outside to see a small red car sitting in the driveway. I didn't recognize the car, and I didn't recognize the man and woman inside it. In our tiny little town, even if I didn't know someone's name, I'd surely know their face, but I didn't know either one of them. I froze with fear as I watched them talking to each other, and my cousin ran to lock the back door. We had no weapons, and no real way to try to defend ourselves other than my softball bat, which was outside on the carport. My cousin hid in a small space between a tall bookshelf and the wall, and I threw myself behind our recliner, which faced the window. I watched in horror as the woman walked up to the front door. Instead of knocking, she tried the knob. I tried to quiet my breathing, convinced she might be able to hear me, and watched her shadow through the curtains as she walked around to our carport. Sure enough, I heard the doorknob jiggle. There was a pause, and then the door shook as if someone was trying to force it open. I covered my mouth and forced myself not to scream. After what felt like an eternity, the sound stopped and everything went quiet. I was too afraid to move, so I just waited. I have no idea how much time passed, but eventually we heard the car backing out of the driveway. Once I got the courage, I ran to peek out the window again, to make sure they really had left. I saw no trace of the red car, but I was still racked with fear. I told my cousin she could come out, and we hugged each other in relief. Even though we were scared to go outside, we decided to get on our bikes and ride to the office my aunt worked in. Once we were there, we told her everything: the phone calls and how long they'd been happening, the red car, and the description of both the people inside. She immediately called the police, and we had to give our statements about it all. When my dad got home from work, he asked me why I'd called the gate guard, and my aunt filled him in on everything, and from that moment on, we weren't allowed to stay by ourselves again until I was probably 16. I attended cosmetology school a few years back, and one time we all went on a field trip to see a big show where they were going to show new hair and nail techniques and such. It was in a bigger city a few hours away from where I was attending school. We all sort of divided into our own groups to get hotel rooms for the show to save money, so me and 3 other girls booked one hotel room to stay in together. After we checked into the hotel and got to our room, we were all pretty excited to have a sleepover before the hair and fashion show tomorrow, so we decided to go get some drinks and food. When we returned to the hotel an hour or so later, it was getting pretty late, and a few of us were pretty tipsy, but we quietly headed to our room. I was sober, however, because at the time I was just about to turn 21, so I couldn't get a drink at the bar yet. We were all just hanging out in our room, planning the day tomorrow, when sometime after 11 p.m. our hotel room phone rang. It kind of startled us because I've stayed in hotels quite a few times, and I never remember my hotel phone ringing. I answered it and said, "Hello?" This was a few years ago now, so I don't remember the exact transcript of the conversation, but I will get as close as I can. A man on the phone replied, saying we hadn't paid for our room, and that one of us needed to come down into the lobby to pay the bill. Immediately, alarm bells went off in my head because we had paid for the room. We had all pooled money and given it to our friend, and I watched her pay when we all checked in together. I don't think they would have given us room keys if we hadn't paid for the room. Plus, adding on the fact that even if something had happened with the billing, it would be super unprofessional to call someone at 11 p.m. when they may be asleep. I replied that we had paid for the room, and that if there was a problem with billing, we could sort it out tomorrow morning. The man insisted that just one of us must come down, because our room isn't paid for, and that we won't be allowed to stay the night if one of us doesn't come down right now and pay, and he sounded frustrated. Honestly, I'm a paranoid person, but the whole thing felt so wrong that there was no way I was letting any of us go down to the lobby that night. I told him that we would be staying in our room until they came and removed us. This time he sounded even more frustrated, insisting one of us must come down or there would be consequences. That was the last straw for me, as now I was sure something bad was happening, so I just hung up the phone and figured if this is really someone from the hotel, they will come up to our room or we will deal with it tomorrow. Obviously, my classmates in the room with me were like, "What the hell was that?" I said I got a really bad feeling from the dude and explained to them what happened. They all agreed that we had paid and that it was basically unheard of for a hotel front desk to call you in your room past 11 p.m. So we were a bit on edge and eventually fell asleep. No one came to kick us out. The next morning, as we went to check out, we asked the person working at the front desk what the call last night was about. They had no idea what we were talking about, and they insisted that the front desk would not have called us at that late of an hour. We all just sort of looked at each other and were extremely freaked out, so we just sort of left quickly after that. I forgot about this pretty quickly after it happened, since nothing bad actually happened. But thinking back on this now, it seems so scary. Who called us? And why did they want one of us to come down to the lobby alone in the middle of the night? How did they know what room we were in?